We know, for example, that 20% of our kids are experiencing significant mental health problems that warrant social services. That's a lot of kids that are already struggling. We know that 1 out of 6 kids in Canada live in poverty. We know that 7% of students in grades 7 to 12 reported attempting suicide at least once in the past 12 months, and another portion actually considered the possibility. We know that 6 to 12% of kids tell us that they don't feel safe at school, a place that they're mandated by law to attend. And we know that 8 to 10% of kids on average tell us that they're bullied and harassed by peers on a regular basis. That's every week, every day, many times a day. But a meta-analysis was done of over 200 studies of kids in grades K to 12 on the impact of social emotional learning programs. And what they found was that if you had a caring learning environment and direct instruction in social emotional skills, not only did you improve kids' attitudes and their social emotional competencies, but in fact, you also showed gains in their behavior, less conduct problems, more pro-social behavior, less emotional distress, and importantly, 11 percentile point gain in academic achievement.
5 fois par jour.
5 times a day they're in the schoolyard, 25 times in a week, 100 times in a month, and more than 1,000 times in a school year where the student is in the schoolyard. If things go well 1,000 times, and if the student is able to play well and solve their conflict, then it's perfect. But if there is even one time when they are bullied, intimidated, bullied by their peers, that has a huge impact on their capacity to concentrate in class. It has a huge impact on their learning and on their educational success.
The sad part for our bullies are that when they want to be noticed by the people who care for them the most, but because they've now desensitized themselves, the slights of people that don't mean anything to them are the ones that are going to get them. And it's so hard because sometimes when you've entered into a relationship with a child who's in this bully dynamic, you know, and you'll say, well, what happened? Well, she was looking at me funny, and he was doing it, but who is she? You don't even know who she is. It doesn't matter. But the fact is that they are so sensitive to slight, but they can't say, well, no, it's not that girl who looked at me funny. It was that my dad didn't come on the weekend to take care of me. My dad didn't show up. They feel slighted by their father, but they can't talk about that because that makes them feel too vulnerable. And so they will notice the slights everywhere else. So these kids are basically walking time bombs. The bully's in the corridor, they're wanting to have a couple of more people in their group, they're standing beside you, and now somebody's walking by, maybe you're walking by with your glasses on. Now the bully isn't going to say to the kid beside, hey, come on, join me in teasing this kid. The bully's going to start the teasing. Oh, look at your glasses, they're really ugly. And now the bully's waiting to see. What are you going to do? Trouble is, of course, if you're standing there, you're in a real bind now too. Because you don't know whether you know that this person, most kids, by the way, know exactly who these kids are. They know exactly who they are. And they're scared. And so now you've got a choice. If you don't laugh with the bully, what could happen to you? You could become the next victim. If you're a brand new kid to the school, or if you're a very vulnerable kid and you know that this bully is a strong person and now they're starting to recruit you, you're going to be right in there with them. And so now the bully's going to look for you and look for the other person and laugh at the glasses again and laugh at the glasses, and all of a sudden laughing at that person with the glasses becomes a way of recruiting. Okay? And it's very difficult because if any of you have ever been recruited by a bully, it's the most frightening thing in the world. Because right now most of our kids know that if I join in, I'm part of the problem, but if I pull out, I could become the next victim. It's a very scary place to be.
First, you teach kids that there's always another way to solve the problem. There's always multiple options before you start getting into the consequences. So several lessons are devoted usually to what else could you do, what else could you do, what else could you do, to get the idea that you can think of other ways to do it. Then you start evaluating the consequences. Well, what happens if you do X? What happens if you do Y? And eventually you get to kids actually understanding how to think through what to do in a problem situation. A lot of them use a stoplight poster to remind kids of the process. First thing you need to do is stop and calm down and think about it before you act. They have exercises of, calming kids down. What is really the problem? What is it that you want to happen? Think of lots of solutions, think of the consequences, and then try the problem.
La philo, c'est quoi? Qu'est-ce que ça donne? Qu'est-ce que ça apporte? C'est un exercice démocratique.
Democratic exercise. It's an exercise in tolerance, of accepting the other beyond his ideas. It's also an exercise in freedom of speech. Obviously, it will influence in a constructive way the relationship between the students, but also the relationship between the adults and students. Many, teachers that are present when I discuss philosophy discover that these students discover a different way of talking about things, and so students will be in a different position, will voice their opinion, which is not always the case in class, and so for the relationship between the adult and the student, this is a positive gain.
Faut pas oublier non plus que la philo va transcender les murs de la classe. On la fait ensemble, on l'expérimente, mais
You need to know that philosophy will go beyond the walls of this class.
les lieux de l'école, mais aussi dans la vie en général. Donc, on la fait ensemble, mais ce n'est pas seulement pour la classe, il y a des gains dans tout le milieu scolaire. Puis là, je me permets de soulever la question, est-ce que nos politiciens dialoguent?
Do our politicians dialogue and listen to us? Do our bosses do that? And ourselves in our team meetings, do we listen and enter into a true dialogue? And the same thing with the students. Is it a true dialogue we engage in with the students?
Basically, our children need to be in right relationships. They need to be in relationships where the adults are in charge, the adults are willing to take care of them. If you suspect that a child might fit that profile, go and adopt them. Somebody in the school's eyes have to light up when that child comes into the school. And hopefully when that child's world is falling apart, they will have an adult that they can turn to. And then we need to truly try and soften the hearts of these kids. We need to ideally, within the context of our schools and the context of our homes, help these children grieve what they could not change in their life. We need to be welcoming of tears. We don't need to be afraid of tears or think that tears are something that we need to get to take care of and, oh no, it's okay, honey, don't cry, because even that can stop tears. We all need a chance to grieve. When we grieve, we soften. When we soften, we grow. And that is, in effect, the message of my talk today.
Relationships affect all aspects of children's development, and we can't forget that. So what's developing under the skin? Well, it turns out the brains and the genes are interacting constantly with what's happening, and the mechanism in the gene is really interesting. And Michael Meany's work here at McGill is revealing much of this. He works with rats, of course, because you can't do this research with children, thank heavens. But they take rats at birth who have a gene for high aggression, and they cross-foster those rats and put them with mothers who are highly nurturant, caring. And for a rat, that means you lick and groom your infant. And what happens is a whole set of proteins come and surround the aggressive gene, methylated it's called, surround the aggressive gene, and that gene doesn't express itself. And not only does that gene not express itself, but if that rat pup is female, she will go on to have her children who have that same gene, but the gene again is wrapped, and so it's down-regulated, it doesn't express itself. What's so interesting is if you put that rat, and I get qualifications, I was at a conference with all these researchers yesterday, if you put that rat back into an environment with highly aggressive rats, what happens? The gene adapts. It demethylates. That protein sheath comes off, and the rat becomes aggressive again. Why? Because you need to be aggressive to survive. So that's how finely attuned our genes are. They're changing in response to the quality of relationships. And there's no reason to think that this doesn't happen in humans. There's research out of New Zealand that followed children for 35 years. And there's a gene or a form of a gene that relates to antisocial behavior. And if those youth who have it and grow up and are maltreated, they're pretty much on a crash course to antisocial behavior. If they grow up in a caring and nurturant home, that's much, much less likely to express itself. So do relationships matter? They matter down to the very cells in our body.